Okay, we're at noon now, and Steve, if you'd like to go ahead and do the introduction for us.
I'll be glad to. Michael, first of all, thank you for all of your work putting this together. I want to express my appreciation to the Indiana Jewish Historical Society. If you hear a siren in the background, it means it's noon in Columbus, Ohio, and it will stop in a moment. Let me introduce myself. I'm a consultant with the Jewish Community Legacy Project. I'm going to give you a 1-minute commercial message, not Super Bowl quality, on what we do, and then I'm going to turn it back to Michael. The Jewish Community Legacy Project is the only organization that deals exclusively with congregations that are under 100 membership units. We're a 15-year-old independent nonprofit working in partnership with a number of national Jewish organizations, the Union for Reform Judaism, United Synagogue, Jewish Federations of North America, and the American Jewish Archives. But also we have a very active partnership with regional entities such as Jewish Federations and the historical and archival institutions represented by the professionals we have with us today. The Jewish Community Legacy Project is a planning agency. We help congregations look out into the future and ask how to best sustain yourselves on the short to the intermediate term. We've dealt with over 100 congregations in terms of more intensive work, and we've had inquiries that we've dealt with from another 100 congregations. The gold standard for the Jewish Community Legacy Project is the creation of what we call a legacy plan based on the congregation's assessment of their future demographic realities and their financial viability. It's been our experience that congregations with a well-functioning board choose to develop legacy plans when there are enough people committed around the table to make informed decisions about your future. Our legacy plans are particularly valuable for more mature congregations as they provide in advance what the congregation may want to do with assets, from the building to making sure that you've got cemetery maintenance endowed, and then ultimately, when the congregation is no longer viable, what you would want to do with your financial assets, setting up grants or endowments to support projects that are of interest or concern to you, and what you would want to do with everything from memorial plaques to Torahs, and again, to archives. We'll hear more about that in a moment. We would be more than willing to work with any of the congregations on the line that are in that 100 or less category. You can either send me a private chat or you can send me an email. My email is sjedelstein, EDELSTEIN 0405 at yahoo.com. I'm going to turn it back to Michael. I want to just, in closing, say very positive things about both Toby and Sean. We have worked with both of them in relationship to assisting congregations with archival decisions here in the state of Ohio. So we're very happy, Michael, that you've made this forum available. And Michael, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for all that you do to help small congregations. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Welcome to the Hoosier State. Welcome to Indiana. And welcome to the state of small synagogues. The reason why I say that is that most of our synagogues in Indiana are small, except for Indianapolis and Fort Wayne. So let's really get into the nitty gritty of it. Why do small synagogue archives really matter? That's the question that I pose today. So small synagogue archives can give us insights into Jewish immigration patterns. They can be a time capsule into the evolution of Jewish life from different time periods. Small synagogues can highlight how diverse Jewish communities can reconcile differences that larger Jewish communities often struggle with. Smaller Jewish communities can often, because they have sparser resources, they tend to keep some of the older items that they had, such as Judaica, Jewish books, ritual items. And for these reasons, Jewish archives are important and vital to understand different periods of Jewish life and continuity. And so the last point that I want to make is that many of these smaller temples and synagogues hosted rabbinical students from the Hebrew Union College. And many of them were early innovators. And so you can see sort of these smaller temples as being sort of a testing ground for later rabbinic innovation. So you have rabbis such as Rabbi Alexander Goode in the community we're going to talk about here in Marion, Indiana, who was one of the 4 chaplains who died at sea in World War II. But he's one of many different rabbinical students from the Hebrew Union College who came to Indiana, who started their career. And so you can kind of see it as these small synagogues that they learned their important lessons they took with them to their later rabbinic careers. Now, here is a picture from the 1980s. It's from the celebration of Marion's. Marion was just having its anniversary, Sinai Temple, and you can see that it's a vibrant Jewish community in the 1980s, a little bit older, very familiar, I'm sure, to a lot of people here. This community, people came to Marion because there was a mercantile district. There were Jewish professionals who came to work in small businesses in the downtown area of Marion, Indiana. And as we can see, most smaller Jewish communities that once had that large merchant community are now gone, except for the smaller Jewish communities that have 2 things. Large research universities. Those small towns still have Jewish professors. Research hospitals, larger hospital centers tend to attract Jewish professionals to the area. But outside of those 2 pull factors, most Jewish life in the Rust Belt in these small towns and cities has left us or is rapidly leaving us. So we can see as these Jewish communities dwindle, we're looking at pictures from their 60th anniversary at Sinai Temple in Marion, Indiana. And Indiana was a state that was blessed with many small Jewish communities that we recorded over 50 years at the Indiana Jewish Historical Society. It was really a focus of many of our documents, looking at these communities, understanding how they functioned, how they got over their differences. I think is really important also for current Jewish life, where we see smaller Jewish communities are going to have to also figure out how to get over their differences. And so I think looking back at history and looking through their archives kind of gives us a key to our Jewish future. Looking at how did they deal with this type of anxiety in a smaller community where they had no choice but to get along. So if you're going through the minutes, if you're going through the correspondence, you can get kind of keys of what a Jewish community needs to continue its success into the future, and also learn from some of the mistakes of the past. So here is the front of Sinai Temple. By 2016, the temple could no longer afford to keep the lights on. Jewish communities are continuing to struggle, and some of the communities that held on, COVID-19 has really harmed them. And we know from polling data that fewer and fewer Jews are joining synagogues. And that also means they're not taking up the leadership roles that they used to take. And so really looking at this, we have a community that's evolving, that's changing. And if we're not careful about collecting these items, these documents, these photographs, these records, these are worlds that are lost to us. But fortunately, Marion's Jewish community really was proactive and decided to collect photographs, collect documents. They put them on a really nice website, marionindianajews.org, a website that we're mirroring right now on our website, with their permission. And thankfully, their history is not lost. It's preserved, it's digitized, it's available, and you can see many documents on their website, and you can get a real feel of how vibrant this Jewish community was. Here's another picture of a confirmation. And I really wish that a lot of Jewish communities like Marion would come together, I would hope, and digitize a lot of their photographs and try to collect documents from different individuals, so that this history is preserved for future generations and not lost. And then here, the Jewish Community Legacy Project, was really helped Sinai Temple and its closing process. Thankfully, there was an organization to help them through its last days, sort of the sunset of their community. And the takeaway, your congregation, if it's a small Jewish congregation, I really have to emphasize, start collecting your historical materials now: photographs, documents, correspondence, brochures, recordings, and prepare to use them with non-acidic materials. Make sure they're stored in places that don't have extreme temperatures. And why does this, what does this really matter? People say, well, what does my community matter? It's just a little, a tiny little community. And what I would say is that most Jewish communities in Indiana are small Jewish communities outside of Indianapolis and outside of Fort Wayne. So that's most of our Jewish community here in Indiana. So yes, you are a vital, important part of our state's Jewish history, just because you're small. Even if you have only 25 community members left or less, you still are an important part of our history. And we don't want to lose that. We want you to make sure that we're preserving these pieces of history. And other ways that we're going to document this, I really have to thank Dr. Wendy Soltz, who started creating a synagogue mapping project, who was the previous executive director, who's now at Ball State University, who's working on a synagogue mapping project. So if you have photographs or you have documents you would like to share, please share them with us so that we can include them in the synagogue mapping project. This is just a different way of how we can illustrate Indiana's Jewish past to a wider audience. And lastly, even though this isn't the, can everyone see my screen where can they see the map? Can people see the map here? Okay. So this is not the mapping project, but this is just to give you an idea, a perspective of how many different Jewish communities were in Indiana at a given time. And looking at the beginning of the 20th century. So you can get an idea of how many different Jewish communities have sunset, and how many small, just an idea of how many small Jewish communities were in Indiana at a given time, and how many Jewish communities we've lost. So, so with that, I would like to hand it over to Toby Brief. She is doing wonderful work in Columbus, Ohio, at the Columbus Jewish Historical Society, and she would like to talk a little bit about some of their efforts there and some of their preservation techniques. So, Toby?
Great. Let me get my PowerPoint up here. And if you can all see that, we are the Columbus Jewish Historical Society. We're a 40-year-old organization that is the repository for all of Central Ohio. Our mission is to collect and to preserve and to educate about the Central Ohio history. And we were really founded on that ideal that Jewish communities need to be remembered as a whole, not only the people, but the organizations, the everything about your community, everything that has a Jewish base to it needs to be memorialized, as well as both our successes and our failures. And as a historical society, we do have a very broad collection of items. And let me, there we go. This is what we looked like 2 years ago, pre-COVID. And just to give you a sense of what we do, this is part of our synagogue collection. We actually have undergone an enormous renovation, and which we're still in the middle of, so you can't see the great photos of how nice we're looking now. But we collect paper, we collect ephemera, all sorts of things like that. But we also have more than 400 oral histories. We have 600,000 negatives from a Central Ohio Jewish photographer, cemetery records, several thousand personal and family files, as well as business files and organization files. And we provide research to academics, genealogists, historians, family researchers from all around the world. So what you collect, what you have, really has not only an effect on your community, but it affects everyone who's ever lived there. You'll find on our website lots of things like oral histories, video histories, portions from our catalog, stories of Central Ohio, stories of the synagogues and how they grew. And in 2016, we added a new component, which was a small exhibit space. Again, to get people to understand what an archive is, to get people to understand how you preserve, what you should preserve, and why you preserve. And that's something that's difficult for those of us who are collecting, as well as just the general public to really get. In our collection, we represent 24, probably more than that now, but 24 synagogues, both large and small. So we represent the Columbus synagogues, which were large, but we also have them from small towns, just like we were talking about in Indiana. We've got Lancaster, Bel Air, Zanesville, Springfield. We hold collections from synagogues that have disappeared, but we also hold collections from synagogues that still exist and that are operating. And that's something that we can talk a little bit about, but it's important because their objects, their ephemera, their records are being preserved in a proper environment, which not every synagogue can do. We house not only the religious, but also the social side of synagogues. That's the sisterhoods, the brotherhoods, the teen groups, synagogue education, Sunday schools, Hebrew schools, cantorial recordings. Think about those things. Those are also a part of your history. As far as the papers go, a lot of this is two-dimensional. We've got the scrapbooks, the letters, minutes from your various groups. Again, like I was saying, ephemera, posters, flyers, advertising, cemetery and death records. A lot of times people sort of forget, but the cemetery is really associated with your synagogue, and those cemetery records are critical, both to genealogists and to historians and to academics at times. We also have rabbinical information, and some of that, it could be photos, it can be articles, it can be silver plaques that were given in honor of one of the rabbis. All of those things are extremely important things to think about. And then a little bit different from other archives, we also actually hold larger three-dimensional. We don't hold anything huge, but we do hold things that represent your synagogue. And so in both of these cases, these represent synagogues from the Columbus area. There were obviously many more windows, and some of those still exist, and some of those are still in particular synagogues today. But these were pieces that we were able to acquire, and they're really a touch point. They're something that someone can see and understand. Again, another touch point on the right, you see the small chapel of one of our larger synagogues. This was an early version prior to the 1950s. And in that photo, you see some lions and you see the bima. On the left, you see the lions as they're being rescued. We took them from a family who had purchased them and wanted to use them as sort of their high school lion representation. We knew where they came from. It was an accident that they were sold at a yard sale, but we went, we rescued them, and you can see them in the back of my car on the way to the archive. And you can also see in the lower left-hand corner the wood from the bima, some of the pieces from the bima that were left. Again, these were in the basement of a synagogue. They were in not very good condition, but they're here. It's definitely something that people see, they recognize, and they can see it reflected in the photos that we have. Again, some other larger things. On the right, the menorah was actually salvaged from an attic in a junkyard. And on the left are 10 commandments from a very small synagogue. The other thing to think about is textiles. You've got lots of textiles. You've got tablecloths that tell the story of not only your synagogue, but all of those names that are embroidered there were members of your community. This was a really popular thing to do to raise money for sisterhoods at one point. And they're wonderful. And they actually, in some cases, are created so that they tell the genealogy of each family. We also have Torah covers. We don't keep Torahs, but we do keep Torah covers. And we also have things like the t-shirts. Whenever you do one of these programs that everybody gets a t-shirt, that's part of your history. That's something that your kids will remember. I wore that t-shirt when I was in preschool. And of course, we have the older pieces. We have things like 2 bricks that came from the earliest synagogue in Columbus, some of their silverware, which has the name of the sisterhood on the back of it, paintings of people that were important to the synagogue, but also those are people that represent the community and they represent the families. It's even greater than just your synagogue. And finally, the other things that you find in synagogues, and we always like to tell people to look at these when you're looking for things, when you're trying to think about your archives. These are the tiny things. These are the silly things that come from someplace in your community. This happens to be from Martin's Foods in Columbus. It was the kosher food purveyor. The pickle fork and the bottle opener. That was found in a kitchen of a synagogue. it's really interesting because, again, it's telling that story of the entire community, not just your synagogue, but your place in it and the place of all of the organizations and the people that make up your community. So that's part of what we wanted to talk about. And we can go a little bit deeper into this, but I'll turn it over to Sean.
Hi, sorry for that problem with unmuting. Just let me share my screen for a moment and I'll get started. Just let me figure that out. Okay, do you see my PowerPoint there? Okay, terrific. So hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Sean, and I'm in Cleveland. And I am with the Western Reserve Historical Society. So let me explain the Western Reserve. Western Reserve is just an old regional name for Northeast Ohio. And we are a private, nonprofit, non-Jewish historical society. And our territory covers basically Sandusky to the Pennsylvania border, about as far south as Akron and Canton. And my job there is to work with the Cleveland Jewish community. My position is funded by the Jewish Federation and was set up in the mid-1970s with the help of community support. And you see this wonderful picture of community leaders and our former library director from the 1970s at the start of the establishment of the archives in '76. And this picture actually really is important because it represents the cooperation of the Jewish community with the Historical Society. And that's really what makes the Jewish archives at the Historical Society happen. It's that relationship with the community that allows me to collect materials from the community, to bring them in, to process those materials, and then to work with the public doing outreach in whatever way makes sense. And I'll give you a few examples of that. So my job really is to respond to calls from individuals, from organizations, from the agencies of the Federation, when they say, we have all this stuff, we are going through a period of transition. Usually, sometimes it could be a family that is downsizing. It could be a congregation that is moving. It could be a change in executive director for a nonprofit, and they're cleaning their office or something like that. And so I will go out and I'll meet with that family or that organization, and I will often be confronted with a pile of boxes like this. And these are from the former Siegel College of Judaic Studies, previously the Cleveland College of Jewish Studies. And they include all the sorts of documents that you might think. So they include agendas and minutes and reports and syllabi and photographs. All those sorts of documents. We also collect objects. Toby had much better photographs of documents and objects for you. We collect all the same sorts of things. The goal is to bring in these materials and then to process those materials as an archivist would, and put those, write a finding aid for those materials, describe that collection, describe that we have brought in a collection from this congregation that is 12 boxes, and in these boxes and in these folders, you will find these materials. All of that information is put into a finding aid that then is put online. So it's online through Ohio Link, one of our state library components, and in our own online catalog. And you can see here just some of the collections related to Anshe Chesed, Fairmount Temple. We have records from that congregation itself, but you see here what came up in these results were the records for the Sisterhood and for the Young People's Congregation of Anshe Chesed. I mentioned that we put things in boxes and then we put things in folders. We use acid-free folders and acid-free boxes to help preserve the materials. We store the materials under the correct climate conditions. And then we put this finding aid online, and somebody can find the finding aid through OhioLink or through our catalog, or simply if they were to Google Anshe Chesed history Cleveland, the right combination of words, and our collections will pop up simply through a Google search, and anyone anywhere in the world can find that we have the collections there. And then they can say, hey, I'm interested in the minutes from the Board of Trustees in 1937. So then they know to go look through box 1 and folders 1 through 29. We are a special collections library. As part of the Historical Society, we have our special collections library, a museum. We also have a living heritage museum further south of us in Cuyahoga Valley National Park. We have an auto aviation collection. So we are really kind of a large institution, as most historical societies are, with different sorts of things going on. My role there, as I mentioned, is specifically with Jewish history to make collections like this available, and then to work with researchers, and not just donors, but also donors of collections, but also researchers when they come in to use the collection and say, hey, I'm interested in the membership records for Anshe Chesed. And then I'll help them find them and guide them as they do their research. We can use our materials in all kinds of ways. One of the ways that we make them available to the public is through the Maltese Museum of Jewish Heritage. This is a local Jewish heritage museum in Beechwood, not far from the Historical Society. And it tells the story of American Jewish history through Cleveland. And so when the museum was developing now, about 15, 20 years ago, the Historical Society was a research partner for the museum. And most of what you will see on display at that museum in terms of artifacts, documents, and photographs comes from the collections of the Cleveland Jewish Archives. And we also have plenty of publications over the years. The Historical Society, I think, should be rightly proud of its publications. The History of the Jews of Cleveland was a publication by the eminent American Jewish historian Lloyd Gartner, published in '78. And then we published Merging Traditions, Jewish Life in Cleveland, which is essentially a photographic essay of Jewish life in Cleveland, a selection of photographs from the collections themselves. Remembering Cleveland's Jewish Voices it is a collection of sources from the archive. So it's a primary source reader. So it is texts from each of the collections that were selected by Judah Rubenstein, who was a historian for the Federation, responsible first for cooperating with staff of the Historical Society to found the Jewish Archives, and then edited by local educators Sally Wertheim and Alan Bennett. I wrote something, A Stitch in Time in the Garment Industry, and then we just published in 2020, we published Cleveland Jews in the Making of a Midwestern Community, which I co-edited with John Grabowski, Judah Rubenstein's partner in setting up the Jewish Archives. This is an anthology of scholarly essays that are written by academics and researchers from Israel to Canada and the United States, focusing on specific aspects of Cleveland Jewish history. It's the collections in the archives that make these sorts of works possible. We also have an online repository in which we have many different collections, one of which is the Soviet Jewish Oral History Collection. This was an oral history collection that I put together with an advisory committee we completed about 6 or 7 years ago. It's oral history interviews of about 80 Soviet Jewish immigrants from the 70s to the 90s here in Cleveland. And we were able to put up the original audio recordings of the interview itself, and then the PDF files that are the transcripts of the interviews. Let me just say a couple different things, just kind of by way of conclusion. So one thing that I think both Toby and I really are pointing out is that we are outside institutions, outside, that is, in the sense of outside the congregation. I'm outside the Jewish community. But the point is that we are larger institutions that are charged with preserving this material. And so I would really encourage, all of you to kind of think about cooperating with some sort of larger institution, because that will help you to get the materials out to the public. And that could be a non-Jewish historical society, it could be a Jewish historical society, it could be a university, or it could be a public library, or perhaps even some other kind of organization. But I think that really will help to make the work a lot easier. And I guess, in terms of the other benefits of that, so for example, for the Historical Society, the benefit we get from this cooperation with the Jewish community is that we get these collections. We add immeasurably to our collections because we are able to represent the Jewish community. What the Jewish community gets is they get our professional expertise, not just my help, but the help of our other curators and archivists in dealing with collections and objects. And then also really, I would say that there's a real benefit even to having the materials in a non-Jewish collection, because what we have, for example, are students coming in to do all kinds of research on local history, genealogy projects, but also research on buildings and neighborhoods, and they use our collections. And that's a constituency that we just might otherwise neglect. So I guess the last thing I'll just say is that I'm also happy to kind of talk with any of you about any of these sorts of questions. We are basically continually in the role of figuring out how we can preserve these collections and make them accessible in our special collections library, and of course also online. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Sean. So I'm sure we have some questions here, and if someone has a question, please raise your hand and I will unmute you, or you can ask the question in the chat box and I'll read it and see if someone here can answer it for you. So I have a question from Steve.
Yeah, Michael, before we go on, two things. Sean, I don't know if you noticed it, but Betsy Frank, who's on the call, is a former Clevelander, and she would like to know how to find making of the Midwestern community about Cleveland, if you want to send her a private message. Michael, I thought before we open it completely to questions, both Toby and Sean talked about the types of materials that can be donated to their archives. I know that you've got a direct relationship with the Indiana Historical Society in Indianapolis, but I was wondering if you could comment for a moment to our Hoosiers on the line in particular, what it is you take and what then goes down to our friends in Indianapolis.
That's a very good question, Steve, and thank you for mentioning that. First of all, we do not store some of the larger items, like a Torah mantle or something like that. We take documents, photographs, recordings, but the Indiana Historical Society, who we donated our archives to in 1999, has strict rules on that. One of the things that we would love to do is that if a Jewish community, and I know in Muncie, they've kindly stored many of the things from the Jewish community in Marion that I mentioned earlier. What I would love to do is to create a repository of some of these different items of material Jewish history and culture that we're losing, that our larger museums have, to put it bluntly, kind of an odd criteria for accepting. So we haven't. So I would love to speak to anyone who would have some type of idea of creating sort of a museum or a depository of Jewish culture in the state of Indiana, where we could store some of those other items that we would love to preserve. Okay. Any other items of discussion or questions? Okay. I'm not sure. Okay, so we have, I'll first start off with Louise Cantor, who asks, very interesting, thanks for putting this together. Are there costs charged to the organizations or people who can contribute tangible items, paper, photos, stuff? Perhaps I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to ask you to unmute here, Louis, and see if could you kind of give us a little bit of idea of your question?
Sure. Hi, my name is actually Linda. For some reason, the rename option doesn't come up in the corner. So this is my husband's computer. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you. This has been fascinating. I am the repository myself of several family histories, photos, papers, everything else. My mother was originally from Cleveland. Most of my relatives still live in that area. My father was from Northern Illinois, which is where I'm from. So I have a lot of things, some of which I've already given to the Indiana Jewish Historical Society because I live in Indianapolis, but I am sort of in a quandary over what to do with other things. So I'm just wondering, I would imagine that there is some sort of cost associated with donating a great number of boxes or items or whatever, such as might be the scale for an entire congregation. I'm just wondering if there's any way to gauge that, or if that's on a case-by-case basis. Certainly, large things that need to be removed from a structure, I can understand might get expensive, but if you could comment on that, please.
Sure. So if you can still hear me, I'll respond there. So that's a great question. Yeah, there certainly are costs associated with all of this. But I'll say, really the way it works with my institution, with the Historical Society, is that, so essentially the Federation supports my role financially. They contribute the money to make my position possible. When we collect materials, we of course do not charge to bring in those materials, and that's not part of what we do. We want to bring the collections in, and so we make the determination about whether or not we can adequately care for those materials, and we will bring them in. That cost of processing a collection is real, though, and if individuals can contribute to make that happen, then we will gladly accept their contributions. And this allows us, in the case of very large collections, it may allow us to hire someone part-time to do that processing. In other cases, we have worked with volunteers from congregations. The collection has not come with any money, but it has come with volunteers, and that's been a wonderful thing because they know the collection very well. And then if a collection doesn't come in with money, it just doesn't come in with money, and that's fine. We will process that anyway and make it available to the public. All of this takes time. And so once a collection is brought in, it's not necessarily something that is going to be ready for the public in the next 1, 2, or even 3 years. It might take even longer than that. We have a large volume of material. But so that also, the other aspect then of what we do is to cooperate with the donors. And if they are able to, not just if they are able to donate money, but if they're able to perhaps even, kind of weed the collection out and kind of half process it before they bring it in, we'll advise with that. If they're able to digitize materials on their own and it can come in with digitized files already, that's a wonderful thing. So to some extent, it really is a case-by-case basis.
We do the same thing. I'm just going to say we do very much the same thing. There is never a charge to give to an archive, to give to our archives. That is something that we want to do. Our goal is to make sure that the history is preserved. What we do ask at times is if there is a small group of volunteers from the synagogue, this is just in synagogue related projects, that if there are a couple of people who are really committed, we like to work with them. And it's a great way for synagogues, both those that are in danger of closing and those that simply want to create an archive, that they work together and that they begin to understand what really is important to be kept. And we'll help you buying the boxes and getting the proper kind of archival boxing and folders and anything else that you might need. So we'll walk through that with you. We'll purchase them and we get reimbursed for them, but we will never charge for you to donate something.
I believe Wendy Soltz had a question earlier. She's still on the line. Okay. Okay. All right. Ava, are you unmuted? Could you ask your question for us, please?
Yes, thank you. I was actually thinking along the same lines. I'm a member of a smallish congregation in the Boston area. So, for us, we're part of greater Boston history, but we're our own community. But I did have a similar question about funding. Are there opportunities, or do synagogues ever seek outside funding from a third party to bring their collections into an archive, such as the ones you are with?
So that's an interesting question. I think what I've seen some congregations do is that they can hire some third party as an independent archivist, as a freelance archivist, and bring that person in to process the collection, and they can still own the collection, and that's fine. That's all fine. It's all good. I think kind of when I see groups, I'm kind of thinking of some other Jewish groups in the community who have really kind of wanted to retain their own materials and process them themselves. That's fine, but what they're not able to do is that they're not able to get them out to a larger public. So my interest is kind of seeing the materials preserved, but there is an interest in making sure that people have access to these materials too. And so that's part of your thinking as a congregation. Are these materials that you want just for yourselves and you're going to keep them and you're able to maintain them? Or do you want to turn them over to someone else so they can be more widely available?
There are also several options with your federations. Federations frequently will provide some funding for preservation work, for moving things to a different location, giving them to a larger archive, but also just for your own preservation within your own synagogue, if that's something that you want to do. There are also small grants around. They're a little bit more difficult to locate and to obtain, but they're there, they're available. But I would, if you're really looking for some help financially, it's usually the federations or the foundations that we've seen step up.
And feel free to, utilize your local Jewish Historical Society or Jewish Archive, American Jewish Archives, and ourselves. If you need consulting, you need help, let us know. That's what part of the big reason why we're here. Nick Jacobs, I believe you had a question. If you could unmute, please. Hello, Nick. Okay, so do we have?
There we go. Can you hear me?
There we are. Okay, great.
It wasn't allowing me to unmute, so thank you. My name is Nick. Linda, actually, thank you for including me on this phone call today. My family is based out of Sterling, Illinois, in Northwest Illinois. And we actually have a temple that is over 120 years old that we did a feasibility study, reached the end of its useful life, and we're building a new temple that is not common in rural Illinois nor rural anywhere. Luckily, my board is my family, so we move quickly. And we are in this process of trying to add a cultural museum because Sterling had a very vibrant, has a very vibrant Jewish cultural history. So we raised enough funding, and I appreciate the funding questions because I am going to start that process here shortly. But in terms of when you create a museum, that's the part for us, if we get funding, we're going to do. When you create that, what have you guys found that really drives community engagement? We have plenty of stuff. Stuff is easy. It's what are you seeing that communities, even the non-Jewish community, for instance, Sterling's 15,000 people, our Jewish populations 100. So I'd like to get people in here to learn about the Jewish impact in their community. What is the response in the community engagement with certain archives? What really works?
Well, we've seen all sorts of different responses. We reach out very much to people that used to be a part of the community, especially when you're talking about a community with not many people, with 100 Jews. We very much are looking out to see who used to live there, because people really do have this feeling of home. And that's critically important once you tap into those people. So we do it through Facebook, through people identifying photos from different periods of time, and then we figure out what that best period is. So we know that there are a lot of people in their 70s who are using Facebook just to be able to identify and relate to a community that they haven't lived in for 50, 60 years. So that's something that we've found. We also, because we have a very small exhibit space, but it was done primarily to bring people in, both Jewish and non-Jewish. We also find that doing some sort of an exhibit that appeals to a very broad group of people. So we did an exhibit on hats. It was called When Women Wore Hats. Its purpose was to talk about women's organizations and to talk about the fact that women used to go to these organization meetings in their hats and their gloves, and every woman has a hat in her closet. I guarantee you, everybody's got their mother or their grandmother's hat someplace. And that really touched people, and it brought in an incredibly wide group of people to come and look at the hats because they were so cool. What it also did was talk very much about the women and how they were able to raise phenomenal amounts of money back in the day when women's organizations were auxiliaries and not really holding much weight in the community. And it also was a way to give women back their names, you know, because everybody was Mrs. John Smith. So we were able to give women their first names and their birth names back by starting this, you know, can you name these women? Can you give them back their names? It appealed way beyond just the Jewish community. So things like that, we're doing a sports exhibit right now, and it's very light. You know, it's an end of COVID kind of exhibit. It's light, it's fun, but you know, who knew that there were 3 Indy 500 winners from Columbus? You know, things like that really bring in a different kind of population. And then you can get into the deeper things. So in that exhibit, we talk a little bit about anti-Semitism in sports. We have programming that we will do that will bring in sort of the Jewish angle or current events like anti-Semitism, things that, you know, are topics today. And that's really what brings people. And then they begin to understand what an archive is. And they begin to understand that, oh, I've got something that looks like that. Maybe you would want this. Maybe we should preserve that. I never thought about it before.
You know, I would just echo the comment I see in the chat from Trent Penley about museums having to be vibrant to keep interest. What I've really seen both at the Historical Society and really especially at the Maltese Museum, since I've been with it more or less from just after it opened, the challenge of the museum is that it always has to do something new to keep engagement, right? And so they build a wonderful exhibit and the exhibit is good and people will come and see it. And you have that, I'm sure you have that same thing where you are. You'll build a nice exhibit, a nice museum, and you'll have local interest and you'll have congregants who come and their relatives who will come. But once they see it, they have to have a reason to come back. And that reason to come back is going to come from either a new exhibit or simply a program, right? You just have a program and you bring people in. It could also be something that is virtual, that is online. You add new collections online, right? You kind of can keep engagement that way. I think, frankly speaking, for the institutions that I'm involved with, it's really hard for them to do that, you know, and through programming exhibits and online. Like I would, you know, choose what you want to do and what you're capable of, and you know, go from there. But it's a challenge. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you.
Justin Tobin, I believe you have a question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Tobin. I'm signing in from St. John's, Newfoundland in Canada. I'm not exactly sure how my board became aware of this event and asked me to partake. If I had to guess, I myself am a folklore student. Newfoundland is the only other place in North America outside of Indiana that has a folklore program. So you tend to see a lot of like similar social media things pop up. Very happy to be here. My community is small. I would put it at 200 to 300 people split between 3 congregations. Why not? As well, we've had a rich history because Newfoundland has had a very long history with colonization, with Europeanization of Jewish merchants, like going throughout the bays and setting up families. So here, a really prominent family that has a fabulous couch and beds. They sell these types of things. The Cohen family, they're a prominent Catholic family now. So we've had a very like long Jewish history that like we're still here, but very small, whereas many people boast Jewish heritage as well. Really interesting area, but my group itself is the Jewish Community Havurah. We're not a synagogue. We are a congregation of sorts, but we're landless. We don't have a plot. We don't have land. We do find it really hard because we're in the process of processing our rich history. Newfoundland itself used to be its own country, and many Jews lived there until we joined Canada and everyone left. That's when you start to see bagel culture pop up in Montreal and New York and these types of things. So we're trying to preserve, you know, what was and where we're going in the future, but it can be really hard if you don't have a space of your own. Where do you put those documents? Where do you put those really cool things, kind of thing? So I suppose that's what my question is.
It's an interesting
It's a
question.
tough question.
The question is where to put the stuff, actually? Is that the? I can't hear him now.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, it's a bit of like, what would your suggestion be if you don't have the space to house it, but you're really interested in collecting this history? It was also a way to tell everyone about where I live.
That's good, thank you. That's really why I'm all for cooperative relationships. I mean, that's really primarily, because I'm at an institution that collaborates with local community groups like the Federation. But I think really, the way in for you is to establish a relationship with a larger institution that is willing to do that for you. And I think it's being open and honest about what you want and need. And also, that institution may say, well, I'm willing to do this for you, but not that, right? So an archives may or may not take objects, for example. We do take objects, but objects require a different sort of care, and we can't take everything. Some objects are very large, that doesn't work. So I really think it's kind of establishing relationships with other local groups that you might not think have anything in common with you, but are willing to help you in that goal.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from anyone here? We've come up to the hour here. Okay, we have a question here. From Rita, I believe. I just unmuted you, Rita.
Okay. I'm calling in from Fort Collins, Colorado. Congregation Har Shalom. Am I unmuted okay?
Yes, you're unmuted.
Okay. And we're not quite as small as some of your congregations. We're just under 200 families. However, I've already started a historic interview project with some of our founders. We were founded in 1986. And I'm making sort of an observation and a question. One of the turning points in our congregation was right before the building was built, and it was before I moved here, we did not have a full-time rabbi, and we had different student rabbis from Colorado State University, et cetera. And I don't know how many of you know or remember the assassination of Alan Berg, who was a radio disc jockey, who was very anti-Nazi. And is that something that people remember or know about? He was assassinated in Denver by a group from the Christian Identity Movement, an anti-Semitic right-wing group. This is back in 1984. That was the event that prompted the founders to decide we needed a full-time rabbis. And this whole group had their headquarters in LaPorte, which is just north of Fort Collins. So it's a very Colorado Jewish story. So I guess my question, observation, whatever, and the rest of at that point, the outside community was not that involved in supporting us. I think if something like that happened now, we'd have more support from other faith communities. Have any of your synagogues dealt with anti-Semitism, either physical attacks on your community or things in the newspapers or whatever? Because I'm certainly dealing with that in the interviews, but I don't want it to be the only story about our synagogue. So I just would sort of throw that open to people.
So the thing that makes me think of immediately, of course, is the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh. And this is well documented by Eric Lidgy, the curator for Jewish history at the Heinz History Center, and he's published on that as well. So that's a great effort to really respond in a crisis situation. I can't say we certainly have not had an incident like that, but of course, all of these congregations have experienced different incidents over the years, just nothing that I can point to like that.
Mhm.
We haven't either, but we're very concerned again with keeping those records because it is so critical. They're sometimes difficult to gather because everyone feels that they should be kept secret or that maybe they shouldn't be talked about. And so gathering those records into the archive does become a bit of a challenge at times. It will never be the entire focus of what you're doing, but it is critically important to keep that. And while we haven't had a direct experience, we've certainly had experiences around our neighborhood in our area. We keep photos of events that have happened in Ohio. The health director at the beginning of COVID was a Jewish woman, and there were a lot of rallies and marches and things. And it was basically across the street from my house. So we have lots of photos of that because it was important to keep, and it will be there. It will be there for people to learn from in the future. Our response as a community is there. The response of the different agencies is there. But it's not your focus. It's just one part. It's in the beginning, I said, this tells about the good things and the bad things that happen in our community. We need to have that. We need to retain it. But I don't be concerned that it will take over because there's so many other things that you will have as well.
Thank you.
Toby reminded me that we do have records from the Federation, certainly related to anti-Semitism, when the Federation really was investigating all kinds of anti-Semitic incidents locally. And so, incidents maybe is even too strong a word. These were maybe, kind of complaints about one neighbor to another sort of thing, right? That somebody called Federation about, and then they investigated. And those, that's certainly, unfortunately, a part of the history. But I think Toby's right. There are so many other factors that make the collections fascinating that it's certainly not the only one.
Thank you.
And then we have one question from Trent Penley. Trent, if you could unmute.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to that for Northwest Indiana. Those incidents do need to be recorded because the Jewish institutions will often try to cover them up or not acknowledge that they're happening. The temple in Gary has had numerous bomb threats, so the temple has changed its policy for fire evacuations of taking the children as far away from the building as possible. We've had photographs in the Indiana Jewish Historical Society collections of synagogue defacings that we use in a community exhibit. But yes, we do need to collect these photographs and incidents because the institutions will often sweep them under the carpet, Jewish institutions included. Valparaiso had a swastika incident in the early 90s, and it went unnoticed until they painted one on a non-Jewish home. And that's when it really got the attention of the larger community. Thank you.
This is a very big discussion within Jewish museums throughout the world. If you follow some of the CAJM, the Council of American Jewish Museums, and their international branch, how to deal with anti-Semitism and what should or should not be presented and say what is or is not saved is a very big discussion right now in the museum world.
So I think that just about does it. If I don't know if anyone has any other questions or follow-ups, but I do want to thank everyone for coming today, for talking about this very important subject so that we can preserve our collective Jewish past. And I would love for I know that not everyone here is from the Rust Belt or from the Midwest, but I would love to continue this dialogue in the context of Rust Belt Jews or Rust Belt Judaism, and kind of create a collective like Jewish historical societies have done in the West and the South, to talk about Midwestern Jewish life, to talk about Midwestern Jewish history and how it's unique from the rest of the U.S. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Please, you can email any one of us. You can email Sean, Toby, or Steve, or myself. Happy to answer your questions. If you have anything that you would like to donate, if you'd like to donate to our organizations, please do. It always helps us all to fulfill our missions. And thank you again.
Thanks,
Bye-bye,
nice to see everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a great day. Bye-bye.